I never thought I'd feel this invisible, not in my own home, not at this age. Last Christmas, my own daughter slammed the door in my face after a call I made asking to visit. The sound of that door closing still echoes in my chest, like a wound that won't heal. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Rose, and I'm 72 years old. I live alone in a cramped apartment on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where the walls are thin and the memories are thick. Every morning starts the same way, gray light creeps through curtains that have seen better decades, filtering into rooms that smell of yesterday's coffee and forgotten dreams. The radiator clanks like an old friend clearing his throat, and somewhere in the distance, the city hums its relentless song of horns and sirens and lives rushing past. I shuffle to the kitchen in my worn slippers, the ones David bought me 15 years ago when he still remembered my birthday. The linoleum floor is cracked in places, creating a map of tiny valleys that catch dust and regret in equal measure. My morning ritual begins with watering the lone spider plant hanging in the window, the only living thing in this apartment besides me. Its leaves are yellowing at the tips, just like everything else around here seems to be fading. On the small table by the window sits David's Bible. The leather cover is soft and worn, polished smooth by decades of his hands resting there during his evening prayers. The pages are yellowed and dog-eared, filled with his careful handwriting in the margins, notes about faith and forgiveness and the power of hope. How ironic those words seem now. You see, David left 3 weeks ago. Said he was going to Florida to visit an old friend from his Navy days. That was the last time I heard his voice, crackling through the phone as he told me not to wait up, that he'd call when he got there. The silence that followed has stretched into an eternity of empty hours and unanswered questions. 2 nights after he left, I was cleaning out his nightstand drawer when I found something that changed everything. Tucked inside his Bible, pressed between the pages of Psalms like a dried flower, was an old envelope. My heart stopped when I saw my name written across it in his familiar scrawl. Rose, it said, with a little heart drawn next to it. Inside were 6 numbers, faded but clear, written in his hand. At the bottom, a date from 10 years ago. Lottery numbers. I stared at those numbers until my eyes blurred with tears I couldn't explain. Why would he hide this from me? What did it mean? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times he'd told me we couldn't afford little luxuries, a new dress, dinner out, a weekend trip to see my sister upstate. All those times he'd shaken his head sadly and said we had to be careful with money. The next morning, I walked down to Leo's bodega on Delancey Street. Leo has been there for 25 years, watching our neighborhood change from Puerto Rican families to young professionals to whatever it is now. His kind eyes crinkled when he saw me approaching with the lottery slip filled out with David's numbers. "You feeling lucky today, Mrs. Rose?" he asked in his gentle accent. I managed a weak smile. "I don't know about lucky, Leo. But maybe it's time I tried something different." That night, I sat in my threadbare armchair, the one that used to be David's favorite, and watched the lottery drawing on the old television. The first number came up, 14. My heart skipped. The second, 23. My hands started shaking. By the 4th number, I knew something impossible was happening. By the 6th, I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. I had won. All 6 numbers. $120 million. But let me back up, because you need to understand how I got to that moment. You need to know about the years that led me to that chair, holding those numbers, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. David and I met in 1971 at a church social in Queens. I was 21, working as a secretary at an insurance company, living with 2 roommates in a studio apartment that barely had room for one. He was 23, just back from Vietnam, working construction during the day and taking night classes to become an electrician. He had gentle hands and kind eyes, and when he smiled, it reached all the way to his soul. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. My dress was borrowed from my sister, his suit was his only good one. We couldn't afford a honeymoon, so we spent 3 days at Coney Island, eating hot dogs and riding the cyclone and planning our future on the beach as the waves rolled in. Those early years were hard but happy. We lived in a tiny apartment in Astoria, so small we had to move the kitchen table to make room for our pull-out couch bed. I worked mornings at the insurance company and evenings cleaning offices in Midtown Manhattan. The work was backbreaking, scrubbing floors until my knees ached, emptying trash cans and wiping down desks in buildings that gleamed like jewels against the night sky. David worked construction during the day and went to electrical school at night. We saved every penny, dreaming of buying a house, having children, building something together. I remember counting coins at the kitchen table, sorting them into neat piles to pay the rent. David would massage my shoulders after my long days cleaning, and I'd help him study for his electrical exams, quizzing him on circuit diagrams and safety codes until we both fell asleep at that little table. Our first child, Michael, was born in 1976. I'll never forget holding him for the first time, this perfect little person with David's stubborn chin and my grandmother's delicate fingers. 3 years later came Sarah, our beautiful daughter with wild curls and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Those were the golden years. We moved to a small house in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a tiny yard where the kids could play. David had gotten his electrician's license and was making good money. I stayed home with the children during their early years, pouring all my love into making that little house a home. I sewed curtains from fabric remnants, planted tomatoes in the backyard, made Halloween costumes from scratch. Every birthday party was planned weeks in advance. Every Christmas morning was a carefully orchestrated symphony of joy, with cookies baked from my grandmother's recipes and presents wrapped in paper I saved and reused year after year. I gave them everything I had to give. When Michael broke his arm falling off his bike, I sat by his hospital bed for 3 days straight. When Sarah had trouble reading in 2nd grade, I spent hours every night helping her sound out words until she was reading chapter books. When David's father got sick, I took care of him in our home for 2 years, feeding him, bathing him, sitting with him during his final days. I sacrificed without thinking, without counting the cost. When the insurance company where I'd worked offered me a promotion that would have meant better money but longer hours, I turned it down to be home for the children. When my sister invited me to go on a trip to California, I said no because we needed the money for Michael's college fund. Every decision was about them. Every penny saved was for their future. Every dream I set aside was so theirs could flourish. And they did flourish. Michael became a software engineer, married a lovely woman named Jennifer, and moved to Seattle. Sarah became a teacher, married her college boyfriend Tom, and settled in New Jersey with their 3 children. I was so proud of them, so grateful that all our sacrifices had paid off. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The weekly phone calls became monthly, then occasional. The visits became shorter, more rushed. The grandchildren who used to beg to stay overnight at Grandma and Grandpa's house suddenly had soccer practice and piano lessons and playdates that were more important. I told myself it was natural. Kids grow up. They have their own lives. But the loneliness crept in like cold air through a cracked window, slow and steady and impossible to shut out. David seemed oblivious to the change. He'd retired from electrical work and spent his days watching television, reading his Bible, and going to the senior center to play cards with other retired men. He was content with his routine, satisfied with his life. But I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible even in my own family. The first real crack in my heart came on my 70th birthday. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, imagining a special dinner with the whole family. I even bought new tablecloth and cooked David's favorite pot roast. But Michael called to say he couldn't make it, work deadline. Sarah showed up 2 hours late with store-bought cake and left before dessert because little Tommy had a basketball game. David didn't even remember it was my birthday until Sarah mentioned it. That night, I sat in the kitchen with leftover pot roast congealing on the stove and cried until my chest ached. When David asked what was wrong, I couldn't find words to explain the hollowness inside me. The requests for money started small. Michael needed help with his mortgage after Jennifer lost her job. Sarah's car needed major repairs. The grandchildren needed money for sports equipment, music lessons, field trips. David and I had been careful savers all our lives, and we had some money set aside, so we helped when we could. But the requests became demands. The thank you calls became shorter. The visits became even more rare. I began to feel like an ATM with a heartbeat, useful for solving financial problems but not much else. "Mom, I hate to ask," Michael would say, "but things are really tight right now." "Mom, you know I wouldn't call unless it was urgent," Sarah would plead. And I'd send the money because I loved them, because I remembered holding them as babies, because I couldn't bear the thought of their children doing without. But each transfer felt like I was buying affection that should have been freely given. The silence after each payment was the worst part. No follow-up calls to see how I was doing. No gratitude that lasted more than a day. Just quiet until the next crisis arose. David seemed to drift further into his own world. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, and he'd stopped wearing his hearing aids because they made everything too loud, he said. Our conversations became shouted fragments across the dinner table. More often than not, we ate in silence, the only sounds the clinking of silverware and the distant hum of city traffic. 5 years ago, everything changed. David had a heart attack while working in our tiny garden. I found him collapsed among the tomato plants, his face gray and twisted with pain. The ambulance ride to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital felt like it lasted forever. I held his hand and prayed to every saint I could remember, begging them not to take him from me. He survived, but recovery was slow and difficult. The strong, capable man who'd built our life with his own hands became frail and uncertain. He needed help showering, getting dressed, remembering his medications. I became his full-time caregiver without discussion or choice. The phone calls from our children became even less frequent. When I tried to explain how difficult things had become, how exhausted I was, how much help I needed, the responses were always the same: "Mom, we know it's hard, but we have our own families to worry about." Hard. Such a small word for such a crushing weight. I gave up my weekly bridge game with the ladies at the community center. I stopped going to church because David couldn't sit for a full service anymore. I quit volunteering at the literacy program I'd enjoyed for years. My world shrank to the size of our small apartment, my days measured by medication schedules and physical therapy appointments and sleepless nights listening to David's struggle for breath. And through it all, the money requests continued. College tuition for the grandchildren. Home repairs for Sarah. Investment opportunities for Michael. Each request came with a story about how desperate the need was, how grateful they'd be, how much it would mean to them. I sent the money because what else could I do? They were my children, my grandchildren. But I began to notice that the gratitude felt mechanical, perfunctory. The words were right, but the warmth was missing. Last year, when I called Sarah to ask if I could come for Christmas, just me, since David wasn't up for travel, she hesitated so long I thought the line had gone dead. "Mom," she finally said, "this year is really complicated. Tom's mother is coming, and you know how she gets. And the kids have so many activities. Maybe next year?" Next year. Always next year. I spent Christmas Day watching old movies on television while David napped in his chair. I'd cooked a small turkey anyway, out of habit more than hunger. The silence in that apartment was so complete it felt like being buried alive. That's when I started to understand that I had become a ghost in their lives, present when needed but invisible otherwise. The realization settled into my bones like arthritis, a constant ache that no amount of prayer or positive thinking could ease. The breaking point came 6 months ago, on a rainy Tuesday in April. I'd been battling a chest cold for weeks, coughing so hard at night that I couldn't sleep. David, lost in his own declining health, barely noticed. I called Sarah, hoping she might come check on me, maybe bring some soup or just sit with me for an hour. "Mom, I can't today," she said, not even asking how I was feeling. "Emma has dance class, and I promised Tommy I'd help with his science project. You know how it is." I did know how it is. I knew that my needs had become inconvenient interruptions in their busy lives. That night, fevering and weak, I made myself tea and toast and wondered what would happen if I just disappeared. How long would it take them to notice? Days? Weeks? The thought terrified me not because I wanted to disappear, but because I wasn't sure the answer would comfort me. It was during those long, sick days that I started going through old photo albums. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and family vacations. In every photo, I was there, cooking, serving, cleaning up, making sure everyone else was happy. But looking at those pictures now, I realized I looked tired even then. Had I ever just enjoyed a moment, or was I always working to create joy for others? There was one photo that stopped me cold. It was from Michael's high school graduation, 15 years ago. The family was posed on our front steps, everyone smiling at the camera. But I was looking at Michael, not the camera, my face full of pride and love and hope for his future. In that moment, captured forever in fading color, I could see everything I'd invested in that boy, all the sacrifices, all the dreams, all the unconditional love. I wondered if he ever looked at that photo and remembered how much I'd given him. Or if he just saw an old woman who occasionally sent money when asked. The photo albums went back into storage that night. Some memories are too painful to revisit. David's departure for Florida came unexpectedly. He'd been talking for months about wanting to see his old Navy buddy Frank, who'd moved to Tampa after retirement. I thought it was just talk. David rarely left the apartment anymore, and traveling alone seemed impossible for him. But one morning in late September, he announced he'd booked a flight. "Frank's not doing well," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Might be my last chance to see him." I offered to come along, but he shook his head. "This is something I need to do alone, Rose. You understand." I didn't understand, but I helped him pack anyway. Folding his shirts, making sure he had his medications, writing down important phone numbers on a piece of paper he tucked into his wallet. At the airport, he hugged me briefly, his embrace feeling more like an obligation than affection. "I'll call when I get there," he promised. That was 3 weeks ago. No call. No text. No word from Frank or anyone else. When I tried calling the number David had given me for Frank, it was disconnected. When I called the hotel where David said he'd be staying, they had no record of his reservation. It was as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. At first, I worried something terrible had happened. I called hospitals in Tampa, checked with the airline to make sure his flight had arrived safely. But gradually, a different truth began to emerge. David hadn't disappeared, he'd escaped. From me, from our life, from the responsibility of being married to someone who needed him. The realization hit me like a physical blow. After 50 years of marriage, after caring for him through his heart attack and recovery, after sacrificing my own health and happiness to make sure he was comfortable, he'd simply walked away. That's when I found the envelope in his Bible. I'd been cleaning his nightstand, trying to keep busy, trying not to think about why he hadn't called. The Bible was lying open to Psalms, and as I went to close it, I noticed something pressed between the pages. An envelope with my name on it, in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 6 numbers written in David's careful script, with a date from 10 years ago. Below the numbers, he'd written, "For Rose, if something happens to me." Lottery numbers. Secret numbers he'd never shared with me, hidden in his Bible like a message from beyond. I sank into his chair, holding that piece of paper, and tried to make sense of it. Why would he hide lottery numbers from me? What did they mean? Had he played them regularly? Had he ever won anything? The questions swirled in my mind like autumn leaves caught in a wind tunnel. But beneath the confusion, something else was stirring, a tiny spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, but possibility. What if these numbers were more than just random digits? What if they were David's way of telling me something he could never say out loud? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at those numbers, memorizing them, wondering what David had been thinking when he wrote them down. Around 3 in the morning, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I was going to play those numbers. The next morning, I walked down to Leo's bodega with more purpose than I'd felt in months. Leo looked up from his newspaper when I walked in, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Morning, Mrs. Rose. How's David doing down in Florida?" The lie came easily. "Oh, fine. He's having a wonderful time with his friend." Leo nodded and went back to his paper while I filled out the lottery ticket. My hands were surprisingly steady as I marked each number. 14, 23, 37, 42, 51, 58. Numbers that meant nothing to me but had meant something to David. "You feeling lucky today?" Leo asked as I handed him the ticket and $5. I thought about that question as I walked home. Lucky? No, I didn't feel lucky. I felt like someone who'd spent 50 years waiting for other people to notice she existed. But maybe that was about to change. The drawing was scheduled for that evening at 11 o'clock. I spent the day cleaning the apartment, doing laundry, cooking a simple dinner I barely tasted. As the hour approached, I found myself growing nervous in a way I hadn't experienced since waiting for my children to be born. I settled into David's old armchair with a cup of tea, the lottery ticket placed carefully on the side table where I could see the numbers. The television flickered to life, showing the familiar studio with its gleaming balls tumbling in their plastic sphere. The first number appeared on the screen, 14. My heart stopped. Then started again, faster than before. The second number, 23. I set down my tea with shaking hands. The third number, 37. A sound escaped from my throat, something between a gasp and a sob. By the fourth number, 42, I was on my feet, pacing back and forth in front of the television, hardly daring to breathe. The fifth number, 51. Tears were streaming down my face now, blurring my vision so badly I could barely see the screen. The sixth and final number seemed to take forever to appear. Time stretched like taffy, each second feeling like an hour. And then, finally, impossibly, 58. All 6 numbers. A perfect match. I collapsed back into the chair, sobbing so hard I thought I might be sick. For several minutes, I couldn't process what had just happened. It seemed too impossible, too much like a dream or a mistake. But it wasn't a dream. I had won the lottery. $120 million. More money than I could have imagined in a dozen lifetimes. The first person I wanted to call was David. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd abandoned me had somehow given me the key to freedom. But his phone still went straight to voicemail, his cheery recorded voice a ghost from our former life. I didn't call the children that night. Some instinct told me to wait, to think, to understand what this meant before I let anyone else know. Instead, I sat in that chair until dawn, holding the winning ticket and trying to wrap my mind around how completely my life had just changed. But before I could fully appreciate my good fortune, I needed to understand something else, just how deeply my family's neglect had wounded me. The week after I won, before I'd claimed the prize or told anyone what had happened, Sarah called. Not to check on me, not to see how I was managing without David, but to ask for money. Again. "Mom, I hate to bother you," she began in that familiar tone that immediately made my stomach clench. "But Emma needs braces, and our insurance won't cover the full amount. We're looking at about $8,000. $8,000. 2 weeks ago, that would have represented nearly half of my remaining savings. I would have said yes, of course, because what kind of grandmother lets her grandchild go without necessary dental work? I would have transferred the money and eaten generic food for months to make up the difference. But now, holding the secret of my $120 million windfall, I heard something in Sarah's voice I'd never noticed before. Not desperation. Not even real need. Just expectation. She expected me to say yes because I always said yes. She expected me to solve her problem because that's what I was for, solving problems and then disappearing back into the background of her life. $8,000, I repeated slowly. I know it's a lot, Mom. But you know we'll pay you back when we can. We're just stretched thin right now with Tom's promotion not coming through and all the kids' activities. Pay me back. Such a familiar promise, never kept. In the past 5 years, I'd lent them nearly $30,000 for various emergencies and opportunities. None of it had ever been repaid, and after a while, I'd stopped expecting it. Sarah, I said carefully, when was the last time you asked how I'm doing? There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, when was the last time you called just to talk to me? Not to ask for money or cancel plans, but just to see how your mother is managing. Mom, that's not fair. You know how busy things are with the kids and all. Busy. Always busy. Too busy for their mother but never too busy to call when they needed something. And when was the last time you came to visit? Not for a holiday obligation, but just because you wanted to spend time with me. Mom, what's this about? Are you feeling okay? You're acting strange. Strange. Because asking for basic human connection from my own daughter was strange. That conversation lasted another 10 minutes, but the pattern was established. Every question I asked about our relationship was deflected back to my supposedly unreasonable expectations. Every attempt I made to express loneliness was met with reminders of how busy and important their lives were. I didn't give her the $8,000. For the first time in years, I said no. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't help you this time. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, what do you mean you can't help? Mom, this is for Emma. It's medical. I understand that. But I simply can't do it right now. Can't or won't. The accusation in her voice was like a slap. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. Emma is your granddaughter. I thought family was important to you. Family. The word cut deep because it highlighted the fundamental misunderstanding between us. To me, family meant love, support, presence, caring about each other's daily lives. To them, family meant obligation, mine to them, never theirs to me. Sarah hung up angry. She didn't call back to apologize or try to understand my position. She didn't ask if I was struggling financially or if David's absence was creating hardship. She simply disappeared back into her busy life, taking her anger with her like a punishment for my sudden unwillingness to be used. Michael's reaction to my newfound boundary setting was different but equally revealing. When he called the next week asking for $15,000 to invest in some cryptocurrency opportunity, and I declined, he didn't get angry. He got manipulative. Mom, I'm trying to build something here. This investment could set up the whole family for years. Don't you want to be part of that? Don't you want to leave something meaningful for your grandchildren? Leave something meaningful. As if 50 years of love and sacrifice and financial support had been meaningless. As if every birthday cake I'd baked and every scraped knee I'd bandaged and every college tuition payment I'd helped with had contributed nothing meaningful to their lives. Michael, I said, surprising myself with my calm tone, I've already given you and your sister more than most parents ever could. I've supported you through every crisis and celebrated every success. What more do you think I owe you? It's not about owing, Mom. It's about opportunity. This is a chance for all of us to benefit. All of us. But somehow, the benefits always seem to flow in one direction. And what do I get out of this investment besides the risk of losing $15,000? You get the satisfaction of knowing you helped your family build wealth. The satisfaction. Not financial return, not inclusion in the profits, not even gratitude. Just satisfaction. The same satisfaction I'd been surviving on for years while my own account balance dwindled. I said no to Michael too. His response was to stop calling altogether. Within 2 weeks, both of my children had essentially cut contact with me because I'd ceased to be useful. The realization was devastating and liberating in equal measure. Devastating because it confirmed my worst fears about what I meant to them. Liberating because it freed me from the illusion that our relationship was based on anything more than financial convenience. But the hardest lesson was yet to come. 3 weeks into my self-imposed boundary-setting experiment, I got sick. Nothing serious, just a nasty flu that left me feverish and weak for several days. In the past, I would have called one of the children, hoping for some company or maybe a pot of soup. Now, knowing how they'd react to inconvenient requests that didn't involve money flowing their direction, I didn't bother. Instead, I discovered something beautiful. Maria, my neighbor from apartment 3B, knocked on my door on the second day of my illness. She was a retired teacher, 75 years old, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Rose, she said when I opened the door, you look terrible. Have you been eating? I almost cried at the simple directness of her concern. No excuses about being busy. No suggestions that I was being dramatic. Just genuine worry from someone who barely knew me. Maria spent that afternoon making me chicken soup and tea, tidying up my kitchen, and sitting with me while I dozed fitfully on the couch. She told me stories about her 40 years teaching 5th grade in the Bronx, about her late husband Santos, about her 3 daughters who visited every Sunday whether she needed anything or not. Family, she said, as if reading my thoughts, isn't just about blood. It's about showing up. Showing up. Such a simple concept, but one that had been missing from my life for so long. When I told Maria about David's disappearance and my children's recent coldness, she listened without judgment or advice. She simply nodded and made more tea and stayed until I felt strong enough to be alone. Some people, she said as she prepared to leave, take so much for granted they forget other people have feelings. But that doesn't mean you have to accept it. That night, for the first time since David left, I slept peacefully. Not because my problems were solved, but because someone had reminded me that I deserved basic human kindness. The lottery ticket was still tucked in my jewelry box, unclaimed and life-changing. But I was beginning to understand that the real transformation wasn't going to come from money. It was going to come from finally learning to value myself the way I'd valued everyone else for 50 years. The next morning, I made a decision that would have been impossible a month earlier. I was going to claim my lottery winnings. And I was going to do it entirely for myself. The process of claiming a major lottery prize is more complicated than people imagine. There are lawyers to consult, financial advisors to hire, media attention to navigate. I spent 2 weeks meeting with professionals, setting up trusts, planning for a future I'd never imagined possible. The most difficult decision was whether to take the lump sum or annual payments. The lump sum was significantly less than the advertised prize, but it was still more than $60 million after taxes. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without ever worrying about money again. Enough to never have to say yes to financial requests just to maintain family connections. The day I deposited the check, I sat in the bank manager's office staring at the balance on his computer screen. 63,600,000, and some change. Numbers so large they felt abstract, like a telephone number for another planet. Mrs. Patterson, the manager said gently, this is quite a life change. Do you have plans for the money? Plans? I'd been so focused on the mechanics of claiming the prize that I hadn't really thought about what came next. For 50 years, every financial decision had been made in service to others. Now, for the first time in my adult life, I had the freedom to be selfish. I said slowly, I'd like to buy myself something nice. What I bought was freedom. I hired a cleaning service so I'd never again spend my days scrubbing other people's messes. I hired a personal shopper to help me buy clothes that made me feel beautiful instead of invisible. I made appointments for all the medical and dental care I'd been postponing for years. But the most important purchase was a consultation with a family therapist who specialized in boundary setting for older adults. Dr. Elizabeth Chen had kind eyes and a gentle manner, but her questions cut straight to the heart of my dysfunction. Rose, she said during our third session, when did you learn that your worth was contingent on what you could provide for others? The question landed like a punch to my chest. When had I learned that? Was it watching my own mother sacrifice endlessly for her family? Was it the messages I'd absorbed about women and selflessness and the nobility of putting others first? I don't know, I admitted. It just always seemed like love meant giving everything you had. And what did you get in return? I thought about that for a long time. What had I gotten? Moments of gratitude, yes, but they were fleeting and conditional. Presence in their lives, but only when they needed something. The satisfaction of knowing I'd fulfilled my duties as a mother and wife, but at the cost of ever discovering who I was as an individual. Not enough, I finally whispered. Dr. Chen nodded. The people who love us shouldn't require us to disappear in order to maintain the relationship. Disappear. That's exactly what I'd done. I'd made myself so small, so accommodating, so focused on everyone else's needs that I'd ceased to exist as a person with my own wants and dreams and requirements. What would it look like, Dr. Chen asked, if you started showing up as yourself? Not as the giver, not as the solver of problems, but as Rose, a woman with her own interests and needs and boundaries. I couldn't answer that question because I wasn't sure I knew who Rose was anymore. Separate from my role as mother, wife, caregiver, financial resource, who was I? Our sessions continued twice a week for 2 months. Slowly, painfully, I began to excavate the person I'd buried under decades of self-sacrifice. I remembered that I'd once loved to paint watercolors. I remembered that I'd dreamed of traveling to Italy. I remembered that I'd always wanted to learn to play the piano. These weren't grand ambitions, just simple human desires that I'd set aside so long ago I'd forgotten they existed. With Dr. Chen's guidance, I began to understand that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary for any healthy relationship. And I began to see that my children's anger about those boundaries was actually proof that our relationship had been fundamentally unhealthy. People who truly love you don't disappear when you stop being useful to them. Armed with this new understanding, I decided it was time for a conversation with my family. Not about money, not about their needs, but about respect. about what I required from our relationships going forward. I invited both children to dinner at a nice restaurant in Brooklyn Heights, one with a view of the Manhattan skyline. They came, I think, because they assumed I'd finally come to my senses about the boundary-setting experiment. They thought I was ready to resume my role as the family ATM. Over appetizers, I told them about the lottery win. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Michael leaned back in his chair as if I'd physically pushed him. $120 million, Sarah repeated slowly. $63 million after taxes and fees, I corrected. Michael found his voice first. Mom, that's incredible. This changes everything. We could pay off our mortgages, set up college funds for all the kids, maybe even buy that place in the Hamptons we've been looking at. We. Us. Our. The pronouns came so naturally to them, the assumption that my windfall was their opportunity. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, I've been thinking about what I want to do with the money. And I've realized that for the first time in my life, I have the freedom to be selfish. Sarah frowned. Selfish? Mom, this is family money. This is once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really help everyone. Help everyone do what? Buy bigger houses? Take more expensive vacations? Invest in get-rich-quick schemes? I shook my head. I've been helping everyone for 50 years. When do I get help? What do you mean? Michael asked. We love you, Mom. We're grateful for everything you've done. When was the last time either of you asked how I'm doing? Not as a prelude to asking for money, but because you genuinely wanted to know. They exchanged glances. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. When was the last time either of you visited just because you wanted to spend time with me? When was the last time you called to share good news instead of asking me to solve a crisis? Mom, that's not fair, Sarah protested. You know how busy, you're always busy, I interrupted. Too busy to visit, too busy to call, too busy to remember my birthday or ask about my health or notice that your father disappeared 3 months ago and never contacted me again. The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. This was the first time I'd told them about David's abandonment. Their shock was genuine, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else. Calculation. I could see them processing this information, figuring out how to use it to their advantage. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Michael asked. We would have helped. We would have been there for you. Would they have? Based on 50 years of evidence, I doubted it. But even if they meant well, their version of help always involved me accommodating their schedules, their convenience, their limited availability. I need more than crisis management, I said. I need relationships that aren't contingent on what I can provide. I need to feel valued for who I am, not what I can do for you. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, of course we value you. You're our mother. We love you. My mother. Not Rose, not a woman with her own identity and needs. Just their mother, a role, a function, a purpose that existed entirely in service to them. I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. I've decided that I'm not going to give either of you any money. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief. Any money? Sarah asked. Ever? Ever. I've spent 50 years prioritizing your financial security over my own emotional well-being. Now I'm going to prioritize myself. Michael leaned forward, his face flushing with anger. Mom, this is crazy. This is family money. This is our inheritance. Your inheritance? I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. You're not entitled to my money while I'm alive, Michael. I don't owe you anything. But we're your children. We're your family. Then act like it, I said simply. Show up in my life because you want to, not because you need something. Call me because you're thinking about me, not because you have a crisis. Treat me like a person with feelings and needs instead of a resource to be managed. The dinner went downhill from there. They alternated between anger and manipulation, between accusations and tearful pleas. They reminded me of every sacrifice they'd made for their children, every hardship they were facing, every dream that my money could make possible. I listened with what I hoped was compassion, but I didn't budge. For the first time in my life, someone else's emotional needs were not my emergency to solve. We parted ways that night with more honesty between us than we'd had in years. They were angry and disappointed. I was sad but resolute. At least we all knew where we stood. The weeks that followed were difficult but clarifying. Neither child contacted me. No calls, no texts, no attempts to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. Their absence confirmed what I'd suspected but never wanted to admit. They had only been in my life for what I could provide. But other relationships flourished. Maria and I became close friends, sharing meals and stories and the comfortable silence that comes with genuine companionship. Leo at the bodega started saving the crossword puzzles from his newspaper for me, knowing I enjoyed them with my morning coffee. Mrs. Davidson from the apartment upstairs, whose arthritis made climbing stairs difficult, began joining me for afternoon tea and conversation. I discovered what Dr. Chen had tried to tell me: when you stop investing all your emotional energy in people who don't reciprocate, you have more to give to those who do. 3 months after our restaurant confrontation, I made another life-changing decision. I was going to travel. Not a cruise or tour group designed for seniors, but real travel. Solo travel. Adventure travel. The kind of trips I'd dreamed about when I was young but never taken because there was always someone else's needs to consider first. My first destination was Italy. Specifically, a small art school in Tuscany that offered month-long watercolor workshops for adults. I'd found it online while browsing travel sites, and something about the photos of rolling hills and medieval villages had called to my soul. Booking the trip felt like the most rebellious thing I'd ever done. For 60 years, every major decision had been made in consultation with or consideration of my family's needs. This was purely, selfishly for me. The night before I left, Sarah called. "Mom, I heard from Maria that you're going to Italy." "Yes. I leave tomorrow." "For how long?" "A month. Maybe longer if I decide to extend my stay." There was a pause. "Mom, I think we should talk. About everything. About our relationship." My heart jumped with hope before my brain engaged. "What would you like to talk about, Sarah?" I think maybe you were right about some things." At dinner. About us not being very good at staying in touch. It wasn't much of an apology, but it was a start. We talked for 20 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in months that didn't involve money. She didn't ask about the lottery winnings or complain about her financial struggles. She talked about Emma's progress with her braces, about Tom's new hobby of woodworking, about missing the way we used to be when she was younger. "I remember," she said, "how you used to make those elaborate Halloween costumes for us. I was thinking about that this year when I bought Emma a store-bought princess dress. It wasn't the same." "I loved making those costumes," I admitted. "Even when it took weeks and cost more than buying one would have." "Why did you love it?" The question caught me off guard. Because it made you happy. Because I could see your face light up when you saw it finished. Because it felt like I was giving you something magical that nobody else could." "That's what I want to give Emma," Sarah said quietly. "That feeling of being special, of being worth the extra effort." We were both crying by the end of the call. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was recognition. She was beginning to understand what she'd lost when our relationship became purely transactional. "When you get back from Italy," she said, "would you like to come for Sunday dinner? Just dinner, no agenda. I'd like Emma and the boys to really get to know their grandmother." I said yes, of course. But I also said something else. "I'd love to, Sarah. But I need you to understand that this can't be contingent on me resuming financial support. I need our relationship to be about more than what I can provide." "I know," she said. "I think I'm finally starting to understand that." Michael took longer to come around. He was angrier about the boundary setting, more invested in the financial aspects of our relationship. But 3 weeks into my Italy trip, he sent me an email that made me cry in a cafe in Florence. "Mom," he wrote, "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. About us not being good at staying in touch unless we needed something. I realized that I don't actually know much about your daily life anymore. I don't know what you do for fun, or who your friends are, or what makes you happy besides taking care of other people. I'd like to learn, if you're willing to teach me." He asked about my art classes, my travels, my new friendships. He shared stories about his work that weren't leading up to requests for investment capital. He told me about Jennifer's promotion and his youngest daughter's progression from crawling to walking. It was the kind of conversation I'd been hoping for years. Italy was transformative in ways I hadn't expected. Not just the beauty of the landscape or the joy of painting again, but the experience of being alone with myself. For the first time in my adult life, I could make decisions based entirely on my own preferences. When to wake up, what to eat, how to spend each day, all mine to choose. I painted terribly at first. My hands weren't used to holding brushes, my eye wasn't trained to see light and shadow. But Francesca, my instructor, was patient and encouraging. "Art," she told me in her musical English, "is not about perfection. It is about expression. What do you want to express, Rosa?" Rosa. Even my name sounded different in Italy, more beautiful somehow. What did I want to express? Joy, I realized. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The simple pleasure of color on paper, of light filtering through ancient windows, of being present in the moment without worrying about anyone else's needs. My paintings improved slowly but steadily. More importantly, I began to remember who I was beneath all the roles I'd played. I was someone who noticed beauty, who enjoyed solitude, who could be perfectly content with her own company. One evening, sitting on the terrace of my small hotel with a glass of local wine and my latest painting propped against the stone wall, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: complete peace. Not happiness exactly, but something deeper. Contentment. The sense that I was exactly where I belonged, being exactly who I was meant to be. I extended my stay twice, eventually spending 3 months in Italy. I painted my way through Tuscany, learning not just technique but confidence. I befriended other travelers, sharing meals and stories and the particular intimacy that comes from being far from home. I discovered that I was good company, witty, curious, capable of deep conversation and comfortable silence. When I finally returned to New York, I was a different person. Not dramatically changed, I was still 72, still a widow, still a mother and grandmother. But I was also Rose, artist and traveler and friend to herself. My apartment looked smaller when I walked in, but also properly proportioned for one person. I'd had it cleaned and painted while I was away, and I'd shipped home several of my favorite paintings. The walls that had once been covered with family photos now displayed my own artwork, watercolors of olive groves and medieval churches and morning light on ancient stones. David's chair was gone. I'd asked the cleaning service to donate it along with several other pieces of furniture that held too many memories of serving others. In its place was a comfortable reading chair by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. The changes weren't just aesthetic. The silence in my apartment was no longer oppressive, it was peaceful. The solitude wasn't loneliness, it was freedom. Sarah kept her promise about Sunday dinners. I went to her house in New Jersey once a month, bringing small gifts for the grandchildren and helping with simple tasks like folding laundry or preparing vegetables. But the dynamic was different now. I was a guest, a grandmother, a person with my own stories to tell about my travels and art classes and new friendships. Emma, now 13 and finally getting her braces off, was fascinated by my paintings. She started bringing me sketches she'd made at school, asking for advice about shading and composition. We spent hours together working on art projects, and I saw in her the creative spirit I'd forgotten I possessed. Michael's transformation was slower but equally significant. He started calling regularly, not for financial advice or assistance but because he'd developed a genuine interest in my life. He was particularly intrigued by my art, asking to see photos of my latest paintings and even commissioning a small watercolor of his childhood home for Jennifer's birthday. During one of these calls, he surprised me with a confession. "Mom, I'm ashamed of how we treated you. We took you for granted for so long that we forgot you were a person with your own needs and interests." "You were living your lives," I said, though I appreciated his honesty. "It's natural for children to become absorbed in their own families." "No, it wasn't natural. It was selfish. You gave us everything, and we gave you nothing in return except demands for more." "You gave me the joy of being your mother," I corrected. "That was never nothing. But I needed more than that role. I needed to be seen as a whole person." "We see you now," he said. "And I like what I see. You seem happier, more confident. Italy was good for you." Italy had been good for me. But more than that, choosing myself had been good for me. The 1-year anniversary of David's disappearance passed without fanfare. I'd hired a private investigator 6 months earlier, more out of curiosity than hope. He found David living in a retirement community in Arizona, not Florida. He'd never had a Navy friend named Frank. He'd simply invented a story that would allow him to leave without confrontation. The investigator's report included a current address and phone number, but I didn't use them. David had made his choice, and I'd made mine. We were both better off apart. I received divorce papers in the mail 2 weeks later, David's lawyer citing irreconcilable differences and abandonment. I signed them without contest. After 50 years of marriage, our legal union was dissolved with less drama than canceling a magazine subscription. I felt surprisingly little emotion about the divorce. Not grief or anger or even relief, really. Just closure. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another. At 73, I was starting over. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My second year of freedom brought new adventures. I took a photography class, learning to capture light the way I'd learned to paint it. I joined a book club at the local library, discovering that I had opinions about literature and enjoyed intellectual debate. I started volunteering at a literacy program again, but this time I chose a different organization, one that served immigrants learning English rather than struggling children. I wanted to work with people who were choosing growth, like me. Most surprisingly, I began dating. Nothing serious, just companionship with men who shared my interests. George, a retired professor who painted landscapes in Central Park. Antonio, a widower who taught cooking classes at the community center. Frank, a real Frank this time, who liked photography and traveling to jazz clubs in Greenwich Village. I wasn't looking for love or marriage. I'd learned that I enjoyed my own company too much to give up my independence again. But I discovered that I could enjoy male companionship without losing myself in service to it. The lottery money continued to grow, invested conservatively but steadily. I spent what I needed for my comfortable lifestyle, the art classes and travel and nice apartment I'd moved to on the Upper West Side. But mostly, it just sat there, accumulating interest, a safety net that allowed me to make choices based on joy rather than necessity. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if David hadn't hidden those numbers in his Bible. Would I have found the courage to change my life without the financial security? I thought yes, eventually. The lottery win had accelerated my transformation, but it hadn't created it. The need for change had been growing in me for years. The money had simply given me the freedom to honor that need. 2 years after my transformation began, I received an unexpected visitor. David stood at my apartment door, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. His once thick hair was nearly white, and his face had new lines of worry and regret. "Hello, Rose," he said quietly. "Hello, David." We stared at each other for a moment, two people who'd shared 5 decades but were now strangers. "May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered my bright, airy apartment and looked around with obvious surprise. The space was beautiful now, filled with my artwork, comfortable furniture, plants that thrived in the good light. It looked like someone happy lived there. "You've redecorated," he observed. "I've rebuilt," I corrected. He sat carefully on my couch, declining my offer of coffee or tea. "Rose, I need to apologize. For leaving? For everything. For taking you for granted, for disappearing, for never appreciating what I had." I sat across from him in my reading chair, studying his face. "What happened to you, David? Where have you been?" He told me about Arizona, about the retirement community that had promised friendship and activities and a fresh start. About the loneliness he'd felt surrounded by strangers who didn't know his history. About the realization that he'd thrown away the most important relationship in his life for the illusion of freedom. "I thought I was escaping," he said. "But I was just running away from responsibilities I should have embraced. And now? Now I'm hoping you'll consider giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway." I looked at this man I'd loved for 50 years, this person who'd shared my bed and my dreams and then abandoned both when they became inconvenient. I felt sympathy for his regret, but no desire to resurrect what we'd had. "David," I said gently, "I'm not the same person I was when you left. I can see that. You look wonderful, Rose. Happy. I am happy. And I like my life the way it is now. We could build something new together. We could travel, maybe. I know how much you always wanted to see Italy." I smiled. "I've been to Italy. Twice, actually. I spent 3 months there last year studying watercolor painting." His surprise was genuine. "You went alone?" "I went alone. And I loved it." We talked for another hour. He told me about his mistakes, his loneliness, his hope for reconciliation. I told him about my transformation, my art, my new friendships and interests. We were polite, even warm at times. But we were also finished. When he left, I felt closure I hadn't realized I needed. Not just about our marriage, but about forgiveness. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger would have poisoned the joy I'd worked so hard to create. I also forgave myself. For disappearing into other people's needs. For accepting less than I deserved for so many years. For not learning sooner that love shouldn't require the complete sacrifice of self. Now, as I sit here at 74, I reflect on the strange journey that brought me to this place. A hidden envelope in a Bible. 6 numbers on a lottery ticket. $63 million that changed everything and nothing. The money didn't make me happy, deciding to value myself made me happy. The money didn't fix my relationships, setting boundaries and demanding respect fixed my relationships. The money didn't give me purpose, choosing myself gave me purpose. But it did give me freedom. Freedom to say no without fear of financial consequences. Freedom to travel and explore and create without worrying about the cost. Freedom to rebuild my life according to my own desires rather than other people's expectations. My relationships with my children have settled into something healthier than what we had before, though it took time. Sarah and I see each other regularly now, and our interactions are based on genuine affection rather than financial obligations. Michael still struggles sometimes with understanding boundaries, but he's trying, and I appreciate the effort. The grandchildren, now older and more independent, have started reaching out on their own. Emma, 15 now and a talented artist herself, calls me Nana Rosa and visits my studio apartment to paint with me. Michael's youngest, Jake, sends me photos of his baseball games and asks for my advice about high school applications. These relationships feel real in a way that our previous connections never did. Maria remains my closest friend, and we've traveled together several times. She was with me in Prague last spring when I painted my first urban landscape, and she'll accompany me to Greece next month where I plan to focus on maritime subjects. I've learned that 74 is not too old for new beginnings. It's not too late for adventure, for creativity, for joy. It's not too late to discover who you are when you're not defined by your usefulness to others. The other day, I was looking through old photo albums, and I came across that graduation picture of Michael I'd studied so painfully a few years ago. The one where I was gazing at him with such hope and love while he looked at the camera. Now I see something different in that photo. I see a woman who loved deeply and gave freely. I don't regret that love or that giving. I only regret that I forgot to save some of both for myself. That woman in the photo wasn't wrong to love her children. She was wrong to think that love meant disappearing. There are still difficult days, of course. Days when I wonder if I made the right choices, if my boundaries were too harsh, if I should have been more forgiving of my family's limitations. But then I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, invisible, exhausted, taken for granted, and I know I couldn't go back to that life even if someone offered me another $100 million. The transformation wasn't just about money or even relationships. It was about learning to see myself as worthy of the same consideration I'd always given others. It was about understanding that love shouldn't require the erasure of self. I've also learned that it's never too late to surprise yourself. At 74, I've become things I never imagined: an artist, a world traveler, a woman who enjoys her own company. I've discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and interests that had been buried under decades of service to others. Last month, I had my first art show. Nothing grand, just a small exhibition at the community center where I take photography classes. But seeing my watercolors hanging on those walls, with little red dots next to several of them indicating sales, felt more meaningful than any lottery jackpot. These were images I had created, moments of beauty I had captured, evidence that Rose Patterson existed as more than just someone's mother or wife. Emma came to the opening with Sarah, and I watched my 15-year-old granddaughter study my paintings with serious concentration. She stopped in front of my favorite piece, a view of a Tuscan hillside at sunset, all golden light and purple shadows. "Nana Rosa," she said, "this one makes me feel peaceful. Like everything is exactly as it should be." That's exactly what I'd been trying to capture, that moment of perfect contentment I'd felt sitting on the terrace in Italy, finally at peace with myself. Emma wants to apply to art school next year, and she's asked me to help her put together a portfolio. We spend Saturday afternoons in my apartment, painting and drawing and talking about color and light and the courage it takes to create something from nothing. These conversations are so different from the relationship I had with her when she was younger, when I was defined primarily by what I could provide rather than who I was. Michael's family came for Thanksgiving this year, not because I asked or hinted or made them feel obligated, but because they wanted to. We cooked together, shared stories, laughed about old memories. There were no requests for money, no underlying tension about unmet expectations. Just family, genuinely enjoying each other's company. As I watched my youngest grandson Jake help his father carve the turkey, both of them concentrating seriously on the task, I realized that this was what I'd been seeking all along. Not worship or constant gratitude or financial dependence, just the simple acknowledgement that I was a person worth spending time with. The lottery money sits mostly untouched in various investment accounts, growing steadily but requiring little attention from me. I've set up a charitable foundation that supports art education for seniors, because I believe it's never too late for anyone to discover their creative voice. The foundation distributes grants quietly, without fanfare, because I've learned that the most meaningful giving happens without expectation of recognition. I still live modestly compared to what I could afford. My Upper West Side apartment is comfortable but not extravagant. I buy good art supplies and take interesting trips, but I'm not interested in luxury for its own sake. The real luxury is choice, the knowledge that I can say no to things that don't serve me and yes to experiences that bring me joy. Yesterday, Leo from the old bodega called to tell me he was retiring and moving to Puerto Rico to be near his daughter. We talked for nearly an hour about changes in the neighborhood, about the strange paths life takes, about the lottery ticket that had started my transformation. "You know, Mrs. Rose," he said before hanging up, "I always hoped those numbers would be lucky for somebody someday. But I never imagined they'd be lucky in so many ways." He's right. The lottery win was about much more than money. It was the catalyst that forced me to examine my life, to recognize patterns that weren't serving me, to find the courage to demand better for myself. But I think about other people who might be living the way I used to live, giving everything, accepting scraps, believing that love requires complete self-sacrifice. What if they don't have a lottery ticket hidden in a Bible? What if their wake-up call has to come from somewhere else? The answer, I've learned, is that it can. The courage to change doesn't require millions of dollars. It requires the recognition that you deserve to be valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. It requires the strength to set boundaries, even when people you love resist them. It requires the willingness to risk disappointing others in order to honor yourself. The money made my transformation easier, certainly. It removed the fear of financial consequences that keeps many people trapped in unhealthy dynamics. But the real work, the emotional growth, the boundary setting, the redefinition of self-worth, that would have been necessary regardless of my bank balance. As I prepare for my upcoming trip to Greece with Maria, I think about the woman I was just 3 years ago. She was so afraid of being abandoned that she allowed herself to disappear. She was so focused on earning love through service that she forgot love shouldn't be something you have to earn from family. That woman wasn't wrong to love deeply or give generously. But she was wrong to believe that her worth was contingent on her usefulness to others. Now, at 74, I wake up each morning curious about what the day might bring. Will I paint something new? Discover an interesting book? Have a meaningful conversation with a friend? Try a recipe I've never made before? The possibilities feel endless because I'm no longer waiting for other people to validate my existence or define my purpose. I'm often asked, especially by other women my age, how I found the courage to change so late in life. The answer is both simple and complicated. I realized I deserved better. Not because I'd suddenly become more worthy, but because I'd finally recognized my worth had been there all along. The lottery numbers David hid in his Bible weren't just digits on a page. They were a message from the universe, a reminder that sometimes, if we're paying attention, life offers us exactly what we need to save ourselves. David thought he was planning his escape, but instead, he was orchestrating mine. Sometimes I wonder if he knows what those numbers led to, not just the financial windfall, but the complete reconstruction of my life. Part of me hopes he's found some peace in Arizona, that his own search for happiness has been successful. But mostly, I'm grateful that his journey took him away from mine. We were both drowning in a life that no longer served either of us, and his departure gave us both the chance to find solid ground. The Bible still sits on my table by the window, though it's no longer David's. I bought my own copy, one without his handwritten notes about faith and forgiveness. Instead, I'm filling the margins with my own thoughts about hope and courage and the ongoing work of becoming yourself. There's a verse I return to often now: she is clothed with strength and dignity, she can laugh at the days to come. For 50 years, I couldn't imagine laughing at the days to come. The future felt like a series of obligations and expected sacrifices, a gradual fading into invisibility. Now, I can laugh at the days to come because I know I'll meet them as myself, not as someone's mother or wife or benefactor, but as Rose. A woman with her own dreams, her own boundaries, her own definitions of love and worth. If you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in my struggles, I want you to know something: it's never too late to change the dynamic. It's never too late to require respect, to set boundaries, to value your own needs alongside everyone else's. You don't need a lottery win to transform your life. You just need the courage to believe you're worth more than you've been accepting. The people who truly love you will adjust to your new expectations. The ones who don't, well, their departure will tell you everything you need to know about what your relationship was really based on. In the end, the best gift I got from those hidden lottery numbers wasn't the money, it was the reminder that sometimes, the universe conspires to give us exactly what we need to save ourselves. David hid those numbers in his Bible, maybe thinking they were his escape plan. Instead, they became mine. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, like I did? Have you ever found yourself giving and giving until you had nothing left, while the people around you just kept taking? If my story resonates with you, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that you're worth more than you've been accepting, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories, and maybe, just maybe, it will help someone else find the courage to choose themselves. Because that's what I learned, after 72 years on this earth: choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. And it's never, ever too late to start. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not invisible anymore. And remember, you are worthy of love that doesn't require you to disappear. You are worthy of relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. You are worthy of a life that serves your dreams as well as everyone else's. The lottery ticket that changed my life had been hidden for 10 years before I found it. What dreams, what courage, what possibilities might be hidden in your own life, waiting to be discovered? It's never too late to find out.